is 10 o'clock, so let's start on the post here. Hi everyone, I'm Dave Larrabee. Want to intro my buddy Scott here. I've known Scott since 2007, I think. At that time, I was programming a lot in C sharp, and the community I was helping to build was, let's say, kind of antagonizing, maybe bullying Microsoft to embrace open source and the whole extreme programming lifestyle. Scott, at that time was a prominent insider in the Microsoft community, and was a very diplomatic supporter of our movement. And over the years, he's remained at the top of my list of favorite celebrity programmers, and I think he's a generally cool dude. I appreciate Scott for a lot of reasons. His entertaining quick wit, which I think you'll see in a minute. Really his point of view on and advocacy for diversity and inclusion in our industry, which I think is really important and impactful. And also, just the kind of basic fact that he's a dev lifer committed to hacking everything he can and sharing those experiences on his blog, YouTube, and perhaps most courageously, TikTok. So please join me in welcoming Scott Hanselman. Scott, take it away.
Cool. Thank you very much. I appreciate that introduction. And actually, it's so funny. I'm going to share my screen and show you what my life is right now, because as David was giving me that kind intro, I said to myself, oh, I'll bring up the tabs with all of the different things that he talked about that I'm doing. And then I realized that I blocked YouTube at my house because I was going to bring up my own YouTube, but the kids are spending more time on YouTube than they are doing their classes. So I had to block it at the DNS level. So I just fixed that. My name is Scott Hanselman, and I've been online for 30 years doing all kinds of computer-y things. I've got a blog that I've been doing since 2002. So if we go and pick like 2020, it's basically every Tuesday and Thursday for the last 20 years, which is cool. It's a nice way to have an online diary. I've also got a podcast called Hansel Minutes. My last name is Hanselman. So Hansel Minutes is proof that I am a really bad estimator. People will ask me how long a project will take, and I'll be, 30, 40 minutes. And they're like, is that Hansel Minutes or like actual minutes? Because I'm really awful. And I appreciate that Dave talked about some of the work that I try to do in D&I, because there's a lot of podcasts out there that are basically, two white guys on Skype talking about JavaScript. And this show tries to be not that. So you can notice that you are able to see this, right? I'm sharing the right monitor, I hope. While I'm able to talk to you and I'm just idly scrolling right now, I'm still only a couple of hundred episodes in to an 800 episode archive. And you'll notice that it very much looks like the mall, which I think is what what technology should look like. It should look like the mall. Interesting people from all over the world doing interesting stuff. Still scrolling and can continue. So please do check that out. One of the great things about having a podcast that has this many cool people from all over the world doing cool stuff is that every one of these people is potentially a speaker at one of your events. They've been able to go and hold their own for a 30-minute wonderful podcasting conversation. So certainly invite them to your events. They're pre-vetted because they're awesome and they're on my show. I've also got episode transcripts. So 400 hours of audio, over 800 episodes, all with AI-powered transcripts. So check those out. And I am the old dude on TikTok. I don't know why I'm doing this, but it's super fun to interact with interesting people from all over the world. It's been very energizing and has got my creativity flowing a little bit. Cool. So slides up and look okay, Dave? Give me a thumbs up. All right, Danke Shane. So I was told that my slides are ugly and I should not use Comic Sans in slides. So I have updated those with an attractive font and a shadow. And then I was told that that was ugly because slides should not be just black and white. So then I had to find evocative stock photography and then talk myself up in the chat here and say, like, I'm a TikTok influencer and you can cash me at this location. But the reality is, like many of you, I've been doing software for very many years. So that's not an example of what my office looks like. Really, this is more of an example of what my office looks like. And I think it's really an exemplar of what many of our places look like. This talk is a new talk and a mix of a number of talks, but I want to welcome you, but also welcome new people in technology. And that's basically what my whole jam has been for at least the last 15 years. I think I realized in the first 15 years of my career that it wasn't that I was not welcoming to new people in tech. I just wasn't actively. Like we hear talks about people being racist or being not racist. Then we hear talks about people being anti-racist. I was neither welcoming nor not welcoming in tech. I was simply in tech. And over the last half of my career, I've tried to actively welcome people into tech because I'm realizing that the next generation is going to have to maintain all the crappy code that I wrote. So we might as well welcome them now before we burn them out when they look at what the horrible for loops and switch statements that I created. So I want to talk a little bit about attitude and style because the talk here is called Mentorship and Sponsorship and Storytelling. And I know that you all are, hopefully, because you're at a conference like this, people who welcome new folks into tech, but that's a conscious thing that you have to refresh all the time. It's active, it's deliberate, and it's an intentional practice. I have found as I get older that intentional practice is so important, otherwise you'll lose time. And I'm finding during the pandemic, as we are all losing time, I think right now it is March 345th of 2020, as we continue in this eternal march, waiting for the next month to happen, that time is lost. Months can be lost quickly. And as I've spoken to new programmers and new program managers at Microsoft, where I work in my day job, we have a number of new employees that have started at Microsoft during the pandemic. They've never been to campus. They've never met their boss, and they are losing time. And we do regular early in career coaching sessions where we sit down with them and talk about being deliberate, being intentional, being in the moment so that they don't lose that time. Because a lot of people, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, will say, you know, I've got 20 years in tech, but then you realize if you talk to them, it's the same year 20 times. And I don't want those 20-year-olds and those 21-year-olds who've just gotten started to blink and be 30 with 10 years experience, but none of it was actually intentional or present. So that's a big part of what we need to think about as we move into our tech careers. I also wanted to bring up this wonderful magazine that I've got here from March of 1984. Young girl doing her coding on a I think it's a TI-89A, I'm not sure from the side there, and how normal that is to have a girl in a dress with a bubble gums doing some coding on the cover of a magazine. I think that was the last time we saw that for a while. And now we're hopefully entering a wonderful new stage where we will see that again. And my philosophy about inclusion is a little bit different than some of the typical quotes you'll see. There's a really popular quote out there you see in all the D&I talks. Diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. That's a fine enough quote, but I think it may be a problem because it kind of doesn't realize that who organized the dance? Who is the dance, you know, who rented the hall? These are the kinds of questions we want to ask ourselves. So I saw this wonderful thing by Daniel Jude who said, inclusion is being a member of the party planning committee. I said, all right, now we're talking. That's inclusion from my perspective. And I believe very strongly in inclusion over diversity. Diversity creates what I call Power Rangers teams. If you ever saw the Power Rangers, there were 5 of them. And one of the weird things about cartoons in the 90s was that you were only allowed 1 Asian girl and 1 black guy. And you could have 2 white people, but one of them had to be a redhead. And what you end up doing is creating this ridiculous team of colorful people. And it's the same team no matter what cartoon you have. That is artificial diversity. That is pie chart diversity, where you have an attractive pie chart, but you're not actually being inclusive. So when we think about mentoring and storytelling and also hiring in business, we want to think about why are we preventing people from being successful in our places, in our spaces. So there's a wonderful alternative technology talk from the early 70s that said that knowledge is power and tends to be hoarded. And I was talking to a friend of mine from high school who ended up becoming a priest. And he told me that there was a time when only the priests knew how to read, and that was how power was consolidated. And I realized in my relationship with my non-technical family members, whether it be non-technical parent or non-technical kid, my kids, they don't know where the files are on the hard drive. The files are in the cloud somewhere. They have a totally different worldview. They think that if the computer makes a mistake, it's their fault. So their relationship with the computer is not a balanced one. It's not person with tool and person with tool that they control. It is a person who lives at the will and the whim of the thing that they do not understand. The technology priesthood is when people in a field don't really want anyone to understand how things work. And putting people down is easy. We've heard the term punching down when comedians use their comedy against the weak. They are punching down. It's really easy without thinking to punch down. We joke about, oh, the kids don't know regular expressions anymore. You're no true Scotsman is a programmer until they can use a regular expression and write it from scratch. Those kinds of things are casual and easy to say, but they end up being what's called gatekeeping. Gatekeeping is just standing in front of the club by the velvet rope and just letting people know that, this is not really a club for you. Gatekeeping can be active. Like we talked about before, the idea, are you actively excluding? Are you actively including? Or are you simply passive? Simply standing on the other side of the gate and not letting people in is also a kind of gatekeeping. So when I'm thinking about how I mentor and sponsor my young people, I think about how is information flowing through this system, and am I using any of my personal preferences, any of the things about me to be biased towards them? My number one personal bias is young people. The older I get, the more I become old man who shakes fist at cloud. And what happens is I have to think about that, and I catch myself consciously. And I go, okay, don't trust anyone under 30. They're 22, they don't know anything. And then I go, well, hang on a second. They're 22 and they've lived 22 years that I didn't live, with an experience that I didn't live. So they probably have something to teach me. And that has caused me of late to really reevaluate my mentor-mentee relationships, because I didn't realize that mentorship for me was me lecturing a young person once a week and then patting myself on the back about it and going, glad that they got the benefit of my wisdom, right? That's all experience right there in the beard. You see that, right? And what was happening was they would get their weekly lecture and go away energized or whatever, but it wouldn't sustain them truly over the course of the week. And they wouldn't really be set up for success. So then I tried to adjust that to we're both adults trying to achieve, and I'm simply a time-shifted version of them. I'm just future them, like Bruce Willis in Looper. And in doing that, the relationship became more eye to eye, and I started to learn from them. Now, Dave was kind enough to, mention that I've been in tech for a very long time, and then I augmented that a little bit by pointing out that I've been putting information out on the internet for a long time. And when the young people see that, they say, wow, like you're not only old, but you're also really productive. And I say, well, like, what does that mean? It means, where have your keystrokes gone over time? My number one thing that I tell young people when they're getting started is you want to put out good work, but it's so very, very important that you not waste your keystrokes. Because when you learn something, you keep it to yourself, who learned? Only you. And that doesn't scale. So the only thing that's interesting about me versus others is that I don't put my keystrokes anywhere that doesn't have a URL. By the way, even though TikTok and YouTube are walled gardens, I have backups of all of them. So if any of these things disappear, I'll be okay. I've controlled my own URLs since the early 90s, and I've got a backup of about 40 terabytes in my house with every photograph I've taken since 98 and every email I've written since the mid 80s. All of that is because I don't want my keystrokes to be wasted, because they might be helpful to someone. And now that we have a world where we can index everything, that's even more important. So to take that keystrokes tip even further, let us say this: you have a finite number of keystrokes left in your hands before you die. To prove that, I made a website called keysleft.com. So I'll put in, we'll say that Dave is 29. He's been 29 as long as I've known him. And I'm going to say that he types 85 words a minute. So Dave has 298 million keystrokes left before he dies if he types full-time 40 hours a week without taking a retirement. So then I can go and characterize that into how many computer programs of medium size he's got left, how many novels he could focus on, or how many emails to his boss. And then you want to ask yourself, if you're of a certain age, like myself, and rather than 29, maybe you are not a fast typer. This sounds awful, but it has helped me prioritize that I want to be putting out things like this, and I don't want to be doing things like that, because emails to your boss are where keystrokes go to die. And that's helped in my relationships with my mentees, because they ask themselves, why should I put something out on the internet? And I said, it doesn't matter if you put it on the internet. You've got to put it anywhere with an addressable URL. That can be an intranet, that can be a SharePoint site, a knowledge base, a FAQ, literally anywhere except email. So what'll happen is we'll have a chat like this, or I'll give a talk, and then one of you lovely people, or maybe a young person, will go and email me and say, hey, great talk, Scott. You don't know me, I'm an internet stranger. I have a question. And they'll ask me a wonderful question. And that question will be a gift. It's a gift because I've never heard of that question. That's a wonderful question. But at the same time, I don't know this person. I don't know you. You're a random internet stranger. I'm not going to give you the gift of 3,000 of my keystrokes, because then I'm just going to go and slap the keyboard and give them all my great long one advice. And they're going to say, thanks. Okay. Instead, what I've been doing for the last 20 years is I put it at somewhere with a URL, and I say, a wonderful friend has sent me this question. Here's the question. And here's my answer. Da, 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 da. And then I send them the link back. Now, the young person that I give that advice to usually says, well, I don't want to start a blog, da, 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 privacy, my identity, all the different complicated things. And that's the wonderful thing about the internet. These blogs can be anonymous. Your identity can be anonymous. You can be a Simpsons character as long as you're a consistent Simpsons character over time. That URL only has to be visited by one additional person that is not the recipient. And that means that it has doubled its power. Your keystrokes can be doubled by simply being Googleable. So I feel so strongly about putting information out there. I don't do talks that aren't recorded. I don't do talks that aren't transcribed, because you just never know. We've all Googled before for a problem and found ourselves asking the problem years ago in a forum with no answers. And that is the loneliest feeling on the internet, to go and Google for a question and find out that you're the only person who's had it. The other thing that happens when you get old is when you Google for the question, you find that it was a question that you had 10 years ago, blogged about, and you found the answer. And yeah, thank you, John Reed, is because that happens to me a couple times a week. And I'm like, oh, I remember writing about that. Put good information out there. So I try to also remember that when I put that information out there for the young people, for the early in career people, that I not try to have an air of professionalism. Now, by professionalism, I don't mean my attitude and how I carry myself, but the idea that I'm a priest. I know about the things. Let me tell you the good news. Have you heard the news about Haskell? It's wonderful. You should come and join us, right? We're all amateurs. Everything that I learned in my degree is completely obsolete and gone. But I learned how to learn. So I really try to make sure that when I'm doing mentorship and sponsorship, that I'm not focusing as much on the tech. I do spend some time pair programming with young people, but I teach them how to learn on their own. Because if you have a relationship where I'm a pro, look at me type, see how I can type those algorithms faster than you? Now let's do a binary search on a whiteboard. That gets you back into these relationships. You constantly have to put your thumb on that scale and make sure that you're allowing folks to realize that we're all amateurs. There are no professionals. Everything new. I mean, Kubernetes didn't exist 10 years ago, and who knows if it'll exist in 10 years. I remember when Apache was the thing, and then I turned around on a Thursday, and then it was Nginx. And then I turned around again a week later, and it was Kubernetes, but the fundamentals are still there. So I get back to that original quote that I mentioned before. Do you have 20 years experience, or is it the same year 20 times? That's really hard. I've had people that I've talked to at enterprises where they maybe have been at the same company for 15, 20 years. And I'll say that, and I'll get a couple of nodded heads. And I had one person come up just utterly crushed. They were in the IT department of a company that you've heard of. I won't mention the company, but the idea would be like, you know, IT at Little Debbie Snack Cakes, or, you know, the chief architect of the Nebraska Department of Forestry, that kind of a job. And they realized that of the 20 years that they've been working on the job, by their reckoning, 7 they sleepwalked through. And the wincing that they felt when I mentioned that idea was that they had missed those years. They'd missed those years by not being present, by not learning. Those were the years without learning. And that can be really painful, to really take a stock of your time in tech and ask yourselves, was I awake during that time? Additionally, I looked at my friend, Tim Berners-Lee, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, and I look at his title, because all the young people want to be a senior web developer, don't they? And I thought it was really thoughtful of Sir Berners-Lee that he didn't put the in front of his title. Because imagine if you'd shown up and you just said, oh, you're a web developer? No, I'm the web developer. That's above principal and staff and senior. But by making himself just simply web developer, he levels the playing field of the internet itself and reminds us that there's no senior, there's no one up on high who knows more than anyone else. There's just people who know different stuff. I would love to have someone like him as a mentor. If you're still here and you are not deleting email in your time that you're spending with me, even a thumbs up or a hello in the chat lets me know that you're a human, and I would appreciate that so much, my friends. So I'm always reminding myself that you're not too old to give advice, and that the mentor-mentee relationship is a two-way relationship. So one of the things that I like to have folks do when they are getting started in tech, particularly in their early 20s, is to, thank you so much for the feedback, is to mentor someone. And what a funny thing. Someone just came in to tech, 3 months at Microsoft, right out of a school. And their mentor, me, is telling them, you should find someone to mentor. Completely throws them on their heels. It's totally insane. Why would you do that? Well, their experience is not your experience. We want to make sure that people understand that their come up in the community is as important as their knowledge of stuff. And that's so important for them to understand. You are never too young to share your experiences. So even someone who is a few months behind you is someone that can be a mentor. Then we start talking about mentorship versus sponsorship. Yeah, pardon me, I appreciate that Marcus is pointing out that the native Who chat and the Whova chat and the Zoom chat are separate. So what I'm doing is I'm putting the two together. So I'm going to watch both chats simultaneously, and that energy will move me forward. Appreciate that. Hello to Woody Zool, who's in the chat there as well. That's exciting. So mentorship versus sponsorship. Mentorship is a word that gets overused. And as everyone who's done object-oriented programming knows, when you name something, you get to claim it. And we'll spend the first 60% of the project arguing about the name of a thing. Because if you get it right, then everyone's going to understand what that name meant. And mentorship is an awful word because it gets reused and overloaded. So we're going to tear that apart, not just into 2, but possibly even to 5 or 6 different kinds of mentor-mentee relationships. Mentors are those mirrors that help you define the dream. They're the ones that say, hey, maybe you head that direction. You know, I like these things about you. These are things that are strong about you, about your path. That's a good direction. Maybe cybersecurity, maybe this, maybe that. Sponsorship, though, is a fundamentally different thing. Sponsorship is about lift. Sponsorship is about opening a door and allowing someone in and then sneaking out. As my family says, the Irish goodbye. When you bring someone into a room and then you sneak out of the party without them knowing that you left. And then by the time they realize you're gone, they've already become successful in the room that you gave them access to. Providing access, providing lift by putting someone into a space that they might shine. If we break these words apart, mentorship and sponsorship, even farther, this would really allow you to think about which of these words best describes your relationships with your mentees. Are you a strategizer? Are you a connector? A lot of people are connectors. I think Dave and I in the early days were very much connectors, where we would talk to people and we'd go, oh, you should meet so-and-so. And then we pull them over, bring the circle a little bit more open and say, oh, you two, did you know you're working on similar things? And then we bring that Venn diagram together. That's a connector. Or the opportunity giver. Someone asked me to speak at a conference recently, and frankly, there's just a little too much Hanselman out there. And I thought to myself, I could sleepwalk my way through this talk. Maybe I won't. I'll try doing a different new talk at Code Freeze that I've never done before, which is super scary. And instead, I'll just hand that opportunity to someone who maybe hasn't had a keynote before. Those opportunity givers is a kind of sponsorship. An advocate talks about you behind closed door and says nice things. Have you heard about, the Woody Zool thing? He's got a whole idea on the mob programming. It could be a thing, right? We should maybe, maybe he could be promoted to senior engineer this year. Talking nice things about people behind their backs, advocacy. Are you a strategizer? I came up with this idea called Life's Board of Directors, Life's Board of Directors, many years ago, when I had my two friends that would sit down, and we were all in different industries, and we were on each other's board of directors. Imagine that you are a company, you're the CEO of your own company, and that company is you and yourself and your career. And then you have a friend, possibly in a different company, different CEO. They don't care about your business. They're not your competitors. They have an entirely different life experience. But those people on your board of directors will tell you that, I think you're making a mistake here. The direction that you're taking the company is a mistake. My wife and I talked about this idea of mission statements, how people spend so much time planning things like weddings, but they never actually sit down and plan their marriage. So when we were putting all of this work into our wedding and all the paperwork, and we had the three-ring binder and the whole thing, and then we realized that the relationship itself didn't have the three-ring binder. We didn't have the same amount of planning. I've seen people put a huge amounts of work into business statements, but not into their own calendars and their own emails. So the intentionality of having a mission statement, having a board of directors who are the people in your life that may not be your friends, but they are the people that will tell you how it is. They'll tell you the real truth, is also a kind of sponsorship, and they provide you that guidance and that advice. And as coincidentally, I've been married now 21 years, and we have a guiding mission statement that we revise each year that tells us, why the hell are we doing this thing? And I'm pleased to announce that I have been renewed for another season. So hopefully she'll renew me again next season, which is nice. Now here's the hard part though. For mentorship and sponsorship, we sometimes don't start these relationships because we think that they might be forever. I don't want to mentor this kid for the next 30 years. I mean, maybe this is just a thing we do for a little while. Acknowledging that on the front end of the sponsorship and mentorship experience acknowledges that one mentors in phases. Your mentee, and this is really hard because it's hard for me to get my head around, may be better than you. You may have 20, 30 years on them and they still may be better than you. They may eclipse you quickly. So there is a moment where you have that, I've taught you all I know of the lightsaber, and now the student has become the teacher. And you say, you basically break up with your mentee. And then if you're lucky, they will give you opportunities in the future and you'll maybe end up working for them, which has happened to me a couple of times. The other thing that's great about that is you can send them off and then send mentees to them, because you want that mentor sponsorship relationship to be one that is self-sustaining. So I've mentored people for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then I noticed that our one-on-ones start to fade away. Rather than simply not showing up to one-on-ones and then eventually canceling it and we don't speak about it, take that moment to say, well, it sounds like you're really doing great right now. You've really got your feet under you. Maybe we change our one-on-ones to quarterly, or maybe a yearly check-in. Congratulations. And then that mentor relationship ends. And that's okay. That's okay. If anyone has any questions as we get here, this is 45 minutes long, right, Dave? So I've got 15 minutes.
That's correct.
That's
You've got 15 minutes. Yep.
If you have any questions, I've got another like 71 slides, but I was going to tell some stories that I have used in talking to people and sponsoring people to get them to think about problem solving. But if there's specific directions that you'd like me to expand on, put them in the chat. Or Dave, if you want to interrupt at any time, please
Yeah,
feel free.
I had a question back a few slides back. You had kind of styles of sponsorship, right?
Yes,
You had
sir.
mentorship, and what does strategizer mean? I'm trying to find myself in there. Like what is strategizer?
So one of the things that I have found, particularly I'm doing a lot of work with early in career people, so less than 5 years in, most people, particularly those that have gone through a high-end school, are shocked at how squishy computer coding is in their day job. They said, I went to Stanford and I have the hard sciences. Why do I have to deal with this difficult person at work? And why do I have to deal with my boss? And this, I was told that there would be snacks. I'm going to write code and they're going to slide pizza under the door and that's the thing. And I said, I am very sorry, but at least 60, 70% of your job is communicating with other people. And unfortunately, the reality is at any company, there are Game of Thrones level personalities. So I let people know managing up is a thing. So I really juxtapose the difference between strategy and tactics. Mentorship traditionally is tactics. Here's a list of tips. Here's a Swiss Army knife. Let me show you how to use each of those tools. Knock yourself out, kid. But using Microsoft as an example, even though it's not a very hierarchical company, like I'm a middle manager at Microsoft. I'm just a dude. Like I'm not particularly high or low. I'm right smack in the fat part of the bell curve, but I'm only like 5 from the top. So I'm regularly interacting with my boss and then her boss and her boss. So I've got these 2 VPs at the top and we have to manage them. You manage the information flow. Young people roll into meetings like that and they just talk. And sometimes they say stuff that the manager doesn't need to know or the VP doesn't need to know because it's going to send them off into the weeds. Because at Microsoft, for example, our VPs were coders, right? Like my VP now like helped write Visual Studio and her VP was one of the people who wrote Visual Basic 25 years ago. So while they're not writing code day to day, they think that they can. And they are coders in their mind, right? And the problem is if we're going to go into like, for example, a VP level review, strategy needs to happen there where the coder who's going to make the early in career coder who's going to make a presentation needs to understand great object-oriented issue, object permanence and hiding of information, right? How do you hide information? Like, are we lying to the VP? No, you are presenting to them the options that are reasonable and then your recommendation. Do they need to know this, right? You basically have to go and strategize all the Game of Thrones chess moves that you have to do. And nobody comes prepared for that because when you're 23 and you're early in career, you were learning to drive 8 years ago. Nobody ever told you that it was that complicated. So I really try to think that the strategizer is the person that reminds you that intentionality and deliberate practice in interactions with people is important. And you want to basically demystify the good old boys network. Because the good old boys network was golfing and cigars and people who know each other and they get promoted. But instead now the new good old boys network should include everyone from all over. And then we just need to think about the different personalities, what they need to know, what makes them happy. And then we actually strategize. I'm a mid-level programmer at Microsoft. I want a thing done. What motivates my VP? What motivates her VP? Like, is it money? Is it making the company better? Is it getting a certain feature done? Like if you're trying to get her to green light a feature or allow something to happen, what is she metriced on? What does her boss care about? Those strategy conversations don't happen at 23. So
Yeah,
we
that
help
makes
them
sense.
happen. Long-winded
Unfortunately,
answer, I apologize, but
no,
that's
no. I'm just thinking.
got it.
I think that particular strategy I didn't learn until I was a VP. So I think what's
Bingo. So
resonating for me is kind of
yeah.
saying. So we have another question from someone, um, from Elena asks, how would you evaluate successful mentorship? Any like checklists, measures? How do you know you've had a good and not so good mentorship day?
I used to have metrics and think about ways to like OKRs, right? Objectives and key results. And now I just ask, does this provide you value? Am I wasting your time? And this is really important because the young people have all the time in the world, and I don't want my time wasted. So I flip the question around on them and I say, I don't want to waste your time. You've got a lot of important things that you could be doing. And I'm saying that to the early in career person. So I'm giving them permission to say, you know, this was a great conversation, but it wasn't what I wanted. And then they can steer it in the other direction. So the only way that you get these, you answer these questions that Elena's pointing out, what are the checklists? What are the measures? Was this a waste of time? Did we just burn an hour? Okay, let's not burn an hour next time. So then the leading question after that is, how do we make the next session useful? At the beginning of every meeting, whether it be a work meeting or a mentorship meeting, sometimes, especially when this is a great icebreaker when I meet new people, particularly at work, very often we'll work cross divisions. So I work in the developer division. I'll meet someone over in Windows. We'll get together and we'll have a meeting. And I've never met these people. And I'll say, hey, we're about to have a meeting here. What does the end of this meeting look like where we just go, wow, that was amazing? Like, what does that look like? Describe that to me now on minute number 1, what minute 29 is going to look like, because a lot of meetings just dissipate like the mist. And then 2 weeks goes by and then we have another meeting where we remind ourselves what that other meeting was, but nothing happens. What do you want about this meeting? How can you leave this meeting energized? So I would say to Elena that if they feel excited and energized at the end, that's good. And the only way you know that if you ask them.
That's great. So you kind of riffing on that a little bit. John and Joseph have, I see a little symmetry in their statements around, you know, not seeing the value of advice right away. It can take years. It, you know, can click. I think I've certainly experienced that. But Joseph brings a very regional concern to the table about being a Minnesotan, and you know, maybe there's a little that kind of directness is there are many fine attributes of the culture there. I consider it a second home in a way.
Keep in mind that I'm an Oregonian and we're basically Canadians.
Okay, all right.
So
if you can do it,
I kind of get what you're saying there.
Okay.
So here's what you need to do though. Young people, particularly early in career people, don't know that no is allowed. The way that you make it allowed is you normalize it. It's okay for you to say no. You teach them slowly to say, no, this probably wasn't awesome. I prefer we talk about X next time that we meet. And you do that by you saying no and you telling them, what didn't you like about this? No, the whole thing was amazing. Come on, it's not kind of it was amazing. You force them to nitpick, and then over multiple sessions, they'll go, okay, now this person can take a no. Because this mentorship relationship is not going to get better if you don't tell me. Like, I can talk to you every week for an hour. That's not going to do anything. If you don't say anything, like, for example, if some of you didn't turn your cameras on, it's 6 in the morning in Oregon. I'm just sitting here talking to myself in a dark room. I can turn off Zoom and do that for free, right? But if you want this to be a two-way street, you've got to say something. So I think you need to teach them, Canadian, Minnesotan, or Oregonian, that feedback is a feedback cycle, a feedback circle. And if you don't say you didn't like it, then it's not going to change. I'm not saying to change their personalities and make them not Minnesotan, but there's a difference between being deferential and kind and then just, being honest, right? I'm not saying be rude. I'm not saying, no, Dave, this sucks. I didn't like that conversation at all. I think I'd like more value if we talked about this other thing next week. That's cool. These are great questions. I love this. The Minnesotan code word for no. Bless their heart. Yeah, that does not mean bless your heart in Atlanta.
I've gotten that a few times. I'll admit.
Bless their heart is definitely not.
Bless his heart. Mm-hmm.
Here in Oregon, it's yeah, no. Or sometimes it's yeah, yeah, no. Or no, yeah, yeah. There's a whole Morse code of the yeah, no's and the no, yeah, yeahs and the yeah, 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 no's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're making light of it. I mean, I think saying no is hard. Elmer puts this in there. I think
absolutely understood.
We're having a little fun with it, but it can be a really hard thing to do.
It's particularly difficult when you're working cross culture, and recognizing that there's culture, there's country, there's also personality. And those things all are Venn diagrams of people's personalities. You know, it's, if you've been spending 22 years in a country not saying no, in a family not saying no, the fact is, though, the only thing that I've learned in all these years is that saying no is the only power that you have. So I think that it is a problem. It is a cultural thing. Everyone wants to say yes because saying yes makes you feel wanted, and saying no makes you think that you're training your boss that you are overwhelmed or you're early in career. Like a great example of saying no. And actually, here's a light one that you could practice on. Do you all have that person that you email at 2 in the morning because you happen to be up working? You don't want them working at 2 in the morning, but you're up at 2 in the morning, and that's different. And then you email them and they reply right back. You just taught them that you expect a 2 in the morning reply, and they just taught you that they're up for it. That's a really awkward and uncomfortable situation for anyone to be in. So I delay send my mails, and I hold them until 9 a.m. You know, there's features that do that, schedule send in Outlook. I am a grown-ass man, and I work at 2 in the morning because I feel like it. I don't have to. But if I go and flood 15 inboxes at 2 in the morning on a Sunday, I've taught them that partners at Microsoft expect you to be on. I tell my team, you can delete Outlook from your phone. If you're not in front of your machine, get back to it. I will call you if the house is on fire. And I schedule everything, and it'll all just appear at 9 a.m. on Monday. And that's okay. We, you know, work to live, not live to work. Oh, someone wants to see the rest of my 71 slides. All right. You asked for it. It's not as impressive as it sounds, kids. So the other slides are talking about different technologies, stories, and storytelling. I'm a big fan of the Swiss Army knife. This is the power. This is why the power of the Swiss Army is the power they are today. Don't mess with the Swiss, my friends. This Swiss Army knife is 40 years old. My dad gave that to me when I was a kid, and it sits on my desk as a reminder that I'm a funny little knife that isn't really good at anything. And then my son upgraded it with this one last week. So now I have, and I still use that one because it's a better knife. Like, this thing is ridiculous, but it's even got a, like a little compass. Like, I don't know if this is for burning ants with the sun or what this thing is for, but it's bizarre. But I talk to people about like being generalist versus being a specialist. But the thing that's funny about the Swiss Army knife and why it's such a wonderful metaphor is that it's a really crappy pair of scissors, right? Like those are good for nothing except for maybe gift wrapping paper, right? But the one thing you got to say about the Swiss Army knife is that it's a great knife. So don't skimp on the basics. You got to really make sure that no matter what, whether you're a bad pair of scissors or a lousy screwdriver, at least you're a good knife. And then I go through, and there's other, I can give you links to another version of this talk where I get a little bit deeper into this about problem solving, which is really just answering yes/no questions at scale. Like, you know how people will call you because you're a little bit later in career and they'll say, I've been dealing with this all day. I can't fix this bug. And all you do is ask them yes/no questions. And then they go, oh my God, you solved it. How did you do it? Yes/no questions, right? It was probably DNS. We all knew that it was going to be DNS anyway, right? So when I go and I teach programming to young people, particularly like age 9 to 12, the problem I always give them is, hey kids, my toaster is broken. And then I just pause and I make it really awkward and they wonder why they're not learning about programming. And then they start asking yes/no questions. And the questions they ask are like, well, you should just buy a new toaster. But then the programmers in the room that aren't really programmers, they're not programmers yet because they're only 9, they start asking questions. And then you find out that they are systems thinkers. Like, is there power on to the toaster? What if you plugged in a lamp? Did it blow a fuse? And then one young lady a couple of months ago yelled out, do the neighbors have power? And I was like, holy crap, you're a coder. Think about that. I want toast, and she says, do the neighbors have power? Right? Network engineer right there. That's going to be a thing. Then, of course, the conversation goes off the rails, and they want to know if there was like an electromagnetic pulse or aliens of preventing me from getting toast. But systems thinking is more important than anything else. Then I point out that the only difference between early in career and later in career is that early in career people Google for stuff, and later in career people have a question that can eliminate a whole class of problems. So then I made this slide of things to check, right? As we all know, Abraham Lincoln said it's always DNS, and it probably is. And as my son likes to point out, because he likes to watch Sherlock Holmes, it's never twins. How did she murder him? She was on the other side of the city at the time. Nope. Was it twins? Maybe they're twins. No, it's never twins. So you can go and assert all the different things that might be wrong in your systems. And then I talk about layering, and how layering is really just lying, and how technologies that you already know how to use, like email, that you don't really think about how does email work. If you flip it over and you look at the back, this is actually the text of an email. This is the literal name value pair. Email, even for us as people of a certain age, did you know that email is just name value paired, done as a multi-part MIME system? Do you know that that's just the exact same thing as an HTML post? Email and HTML form posts are the same thing. Brain explodes, right? Yeah. Exactly. Of course it is. Why shouldn't it be? But telling a young person that is incredibly powerful, because they realize that it's like, how did you make that from these Legos? All the same Lego elements. You already know these things. HTML is HTTP over port 80, and SMTP goes over port 25. It's all just ports and name value pairs. So we talk about that. Good ideas get reused, whether it's a hard drive or a Victrola. It's a spinning thing with data encoded on a disk. It's not rocket surgery, kids. Fast forwarding very quickly, because I know we're out of time already. Are we okay? We got maybe like 1 minute left, Dave?
You give it 1 minute.
1 minute.
Yeah.
This guy right here is on a television show called Altered Carbon. He plays Poe, who is an AI of a hotel. And I'm a huge fan of this character actor. So I tweet him, and he tweets back, and it turns out he lives in Portland. So I'm a huge fan. I'm like, oh, I love this guy. So I'm like, I shoot my shot, right? If I'm going to have a bromance with an actor, I'm going to do it this way. So I invite him to Chipotle, and then we go and we hang out. And he's a lovely guy. So now we're friends, and we have an interview, and we talk on the podcast, and like, you know, I come home with the SD card, and that's what's on the SD card. And this is me looking for my files. And I thought I was going to die, because I can never be friends with this man again. He's not going to want to take my calls. So I don't know anything about anything. I'm a mediocre coder at best, but I do know that this disk drive tells me that there's 300 megabytes on it. But that file system has a recursive one space folder that points back to itself. And given that I want to be friends with this man, but I'm not going to be able to if I don't find this file back, I start learning about file systems. And I start digging around, and I realize that there's certain bytes that have been corrupted. So I go in with a hex editor, make an image of the thing, mount it on Linux, change the stuff, and find the files. And now we're still friends. This is a story that I tell the young people, because nothing in the computer is hidden from you. It's just a matter of how many layers of abstraction that you want to peel away. This is not a story of smart man. This is a story of dumb person who just knew how to read the docs and eventually dig out files off of an SD card. Blah, 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 animated GIF, typewriter, blah, 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 open source artificial pancreas, end of speech.
Awesome. Well, I really thank you, Scott. I want to volunteer to produce Scott Conf, a 3-day conference that is just you telling stories and talking. It was a really amazing keynote. I put in a topic in Whova around kind of continuing thoughts around storytelling and mentorship, or I'm sorry, mentorship and sponsorship. There's a storytelling topic in there. So go on in there if you want to keep the conversation going on whatever chat medium you prefer. I guess it'll be a little anarchic, but thanks again, Scott. Really, really great. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Follow me on TikTok. See you all later.
All right. Bye-bye.